Well, I want to start today as we do every single week, and that is I want to welcome our campuses. And so to those of you at our Kenosha campus, hello. Racine campus, hello. Good to have you. Our online campus, we have a whole bunch of people watch every week online, different parts of the country and the world. And we want to say hello to you. And our Feisty Weekends on Wednesday campus, we want to welcome you. Now, don't be misleading. You got to keep this energy up all service long, all right? So here's the deal, guys. Back in 2006, my family and I were living in the Seattle area when we experienced what's become known as the Hanukkah Eve windstorm. And it doesn't have a real huge name to it, but the fact is it was a big deal. 18 people died either directly or indirectly because of the storm. The damage amounted in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and almost 2 million people were left without power for more than a week. My family and I were one of those people. And so I remember it very clearly because it was the month of December, it was the middle of December, and we had to try to stay warm at night, and so we slept in front of the fireplace every night. And then in the evenings, just to stay warm, a lot of times we would just get into the car and drive around and use the heat of the vehicle. And it was interesting because we'd be driving around, and the vast majority of the homes were completely dark. But every so often, we would see a house with their light on. It was like, nah, right? It was like this totally unfair thing. But why were they able to have their lights on? Anybody know? Yeah, they had a generator. They possessed something that most of us did not, and it gave them the ability to have light in the midst of the darkness. Now, I think you would absolutely agree with me when I say that when we look at the things unfolding in our world, the tragedy in our world, the pain in our world, the corruption in our world, often the only word in our vocabulary that even seems adequate to describe what we see is the word darkness. And over time, that darkness can become very overwhelming, and it can feel very, very hopeless. But it doesn't have to be. In fact, in the most famous talk that Jesus ever gave, he is standing on a hillside, and he's surrounded by thousands of people who are following him, and he references this darkness. And he says to his followers, "You are the light of the world, like a city on a hilltop that cannot be hidden." So Jesus doesn't downplay the darkness, and he doesn't ignore the hopelessness, but what he does for his followers is he elevates this idea that it's possible for them to be light in the midst of the darkness. Now that's a big deal, because last week we launched this teaching series that we're just simply calling, Why in the World Does It Matter? Right? Why in the world does this matter? Why does the death of Jesus matter? Why does the resurrection matter? Why does being a follower of Jesus matter? I mean, what is it about followers of Jesus that is unique? I mean, think about it. At some level, we're supposed to apparently possess something that allows us to be light in the midst of darkness. So what is it? That's a pretty bold question. What is it that we possess? It's actually, it could come across as arrogant, like we have this special something, but it has to be answered. It has to be addressed at some level, because I mentioned this last week. If we were to take all of my friends and we were to put them into one room, and we might be able to get by with just a kitchen, right? But if we were to put them all into one room, and then you just spend a day talking to them, interacting with them, high-fiving them, I'm curious if at the end of the day, you would be able, just based on your interactions, to put them into two different categories: followers of Jesus and not followers of Jesus. My guess is it would be almost impossible, because all of my friends are nice, and all of my friends are kind, and they're loving, and they're generous, and none of them have defriended me on Facebook, so we're cool, right? All of them are really good people. And so I think you'd have a really difficult time. So what is it that makes followers of Jesus different than everyone else? Well, I started to unpack this just a little bit last week, but the answer is this word, hope. As followers of Jesus, we absolutely live with the hope that there is way more to this world than we can see with our naked eye. We have this hope that when life falls apart, God can actually bring beauty out of the ashes. As followers of Jesus, we have this hope that God can take our biggest regrets and our failures, and he can use them for something significant in our life, like he can bring purpose and meaning from them. We have this hope that people can change. We have hope that I can change, right? That at some level, I can die to my self-righteousness, and I can die to anger, and I can die to shame, and I can die to destructive behaviors. And not only can I die to them, but I can be resurrected to something better. I can be resurrected to new life. The Apostle Paul in the first century, he writes a letter to a man named Timothy. Now, Timothy is a young pastor. He's dealing with the stresses of leadership, the insecurities of leadership, the pain of leadership. And yet Paul in his letter encourages him not to give up. He says, I know it's tough, but, then he writes this is why we work hard and continue to struggle. For our hope is in the living God. Our hope is in the living God. Our hope is not in our circumstances. It's not in our situation. It's not in our beliefs. It's not in our behavior. Our hope is in the living God. That's what's supposed to define us as followers of Jesus. Right? We're not supposed to be people of doom and gloom. Where every time people are talking about the news or every time people are talking about their situations, we're like, oh, that's scary, that's terrifying, oh, that's horrible. We're not supposed to be the ones on social media who are fueling negativity. We're supposed to be people of hope. And yet the tension that we have is all of us at one point have faced this or are facing it or certainly will face it. And that is this tension of trying to maintain hope in a world that feels hopelessly broken. Like, how do you maintain hope when you're doing your best to make your marriage work, but your partner couldn't care less? How do you maintain hope when you're working so hard at your job and you're trying to move the company forward, but you're constantly being overlooked for promotions or advancements? How do you maintain hope when you've got a kid with so much potential and you see a bright future for them, but then they get caught up in the wrong group of friends and now you're watching their life spiral out of control? How do you maintain hope in a world that feels hopelessly broken? Now, I hope you took your Prozac today because I want to read some headlines that I came across just in the last couple days. All right, this is not like old stuff that I had to reach out for. I literally just went to a couple news sites and grabbed some headlines. Here we go. YouTube shooting. Nassim Agdam shoots 3 before killing herself at San Bruno headquarters. Next one. Girl forced to watch boyfriend's brutal killing before she was murdered. Tossed down mineshaft, prosecutors say. Next one. He's blamed for 12 killings, 45 rapes, and authorities don't know who he is. Next one. The troubling past of a family whose car plunged off a cliff. I mean, it's endless. Over and over and over, headline after headline. Here's another one. Fast food chain will no longer serve pot smokers. That's bad news for about 20% of this church. Part of the reality of life is that there are going to be days and there are going to be seasons in our life in which we're going to try to have to maintain hope in a situation or in a relationship that feels absolutely hopeless. Now, just so we're all on the same page, for the sake and the purpose of this talk, here's how I define hope. Hope is wherever I place my confidence. Okay, that's hope. It's wherever I place my confidence. It's the person, it's the situation, it's the talent that I lean into as a source of stability. And so really our hope can be anywhere. It can be in a husband or a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. It can be in a career. It can be in a company. If you're crazy talented, right, it can be in your beliefs. It can be in your intelligence. And every single one of us, we don't think about it. We place our hope and our expectations in someone or something. It's just we do it naturally. And really the only time we ever think about where we placed our hope is when we're feeling hopeless. And when we realize, wow, the expectations I had in that person, the expectations I had that my IQ and my intelligence was going to carry me through this, the expectations I had that I thought I was going to have that job forever, when that all of a sudden falls apart and our life feels out of control, that's when we realize where we have placed our hope. So what do you do when the foundation of your hope starts to collapse from underneath you? What do you do when you've dreamed your whole life of having biological children, but now the doctor's made it clear, hey, that ain't going to happen? What do you do when you planned on being married by your early 30s, but now you're in your mid-40s and you're still saying, I haven't found that special someone? What do you do when you say, hey, I really was convinced I was going to retire at 65 years old, but now the economy has forced you to work a few more years? What do you do when you had plans that when all of your kids were finally out of the house, you and your spouse would have time with each other, and hopefully you could build this life of happily ever after. But now the relationship has fallen apart. See, none of us really think about where we're putting our hope until we're in the situation where we start to feel hopeless and there's some sort of free fall that we're experiencing. Now, here's what's interesting. This is where we ought to be so different, again, as followers of Jesus. It's where we ground our hope, because everybody puts their hope somewhere, right? As followers of Jesus, our hope should not be in a career. Our hope should not be rooted in relationships. It should not be rooted in what we achieve or accomplish or accumulate. It shouldn't be grounded and rooted in our reputation or what people think about us. Our hope ought to be fully in God. This is why King David of Israel, he writes a song of worship, and in the song he writes these words, "We put our hope in the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name." And then he says, "Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord, for our hope is in you alone." Now, as Americans, I think it's probably impossible for us to really grasp what it is to put our hope in God alone. Because very early on, we all start having these ideas of what it looks like to be successful and have a great life. Right? We all have ideas of what it's going to take to get there. So for me, I think I just kind of picked it up from maybe my parents or the church I attended. It's all good things, right? For me, it's pretty much, if I do the right things and I make the right connections and I meet the right people and I marry the right person, and for the most part, I do good. I stay away from bad. I don't do drugs. I only drink, alcohol in a limited amount, and I save for retirement, and I do all the things that I know I'm supposed to do, then life is going to turn out good. And whatever your guidelines are, whatever you think is going to get you to a good place in life, those are probably good guidelines to follow. There's nothing wrong with that. But what we see happen over and over and over again in life is we can do all the right things, and life still can fall apart. So where's our hope? I mean, it ought to be in God. Now, to put my hope in God, and this may sound really, really trite, but it means even though I don't know what the future holds, I know who holds the future. To put my hope in God means that I know the biggest pains and hurts that I've gone through in life are not going to be wasted because God can bring good out of them. I'm confident of that. To put my hope in God means that I know my failures are not fatal. God can use them for something bigger in my life. To put my hope in God means that ultimately, I believe God's ways are better than my ways, even when I cannot connect the dots and understand his ways. To put my hope in God means even though I'm going through a difficult season right now, I know God is with me and I'm confident of it. It doesn't mean that everything in life is unicorns and roses and we're skipping on clouds and we're picking lilies and we're having cotton candy, all that. No, that is not hope. Hope is grounded in saying, God is with me in this moment, even though it doesn't feel like it. Now, the Apostle Paul, I think, would be a perfect example of this. Because if we were to just take some time and we were to shout out attributes or character traits of what a model follower of Jesus would look like, we would put the Apostle Paul up on stage. Guy prays a lot. He studies the scriptures. He encourages people. In fact, in the first century, he wrote letters to many, many different churches and small groups of followers of Jesus, and he would encourage them, and he would give them great doctrine. Here we are 2,000 years later. 13 of his letters ended up in our Bible. We read from them. We teach them. I mean, the dude has got his life put together. And yet it was filled with difficulty, and it was filled with pain, and it was filled with tragedy. I mean, let me just walk through one of the stories in Paul's life. Before I get into the story, I want to give you a little bit of background. All right, Paul was a Jew, but many of his friends were not Jews, which we wouldn't think much about that, but in the first century, this was a big deal. Jewish people were very suspicious of Paul. There were lots of rumors surrounding what he believed and what he taught. A lot of people said, well, he don't care about the Jewish law. He doesn't care about the laws of Moses. And so a lot of Jews really despised Paul and thought he was trying to destroy Judaism. And eventually his reputation began to affect him in a really big way. He would go into a community And different groups of people would see Paul different way, in different ways, and they would interpret what he said differently. And so little riots would break out, and sometimes big riots would break out. As a matter of fact, in one occasion, a huge riot does break out, and it's in the city of Jerusalem. We read about it in Acts chapter 21. And while this riot is breaking out, Paul's kind of caught, and he's trapped in the center of all this. And all the authorities know is, hey, that guy looks like he's part of this. And so because he's such a key part of this, they literally grab him and arrest him. Now, they don't even know why they arrest him. They just assume this dude is up to no good. Well, what should have been a couple of days of Paul sitting in a jail and then kind of wrestling through and figuring this out literally turns into 2 years of Paul being in prison. The legal system was just totally junked up. It was just a garbage system. And so 2 years, Paul is a prisoner. And it's during the second year of his imprisonment that it's finally decided, hey, we aren't going to deal with this here in Jerusalem. We're going to send Paul to Rome. He can have the trial in Rome. It was a long ways away. And so in November of AD 59, Paul is placed on a ship. He leaves out of a port near Jerusalem, and he's sent to Rome. Now, this is not, by any stretch of the imagination, a Disney cruise. All right, this ship has hundreds of prisoners on it. And they leave in early November. This is a time where most ships would be docked for the winter. The weather can be dangerous, but the captain of the ship, the sailors, the crewmen, they all decide, hey, we're going to take the chance and we're going to go off to Rome. Well, sure enough, several weeks into their journey, the captain and the crew find themselves in very, very scary situation because of the weather. In fact, here's what happened. When a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it. So they pulled up anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But the weather changed abruptly, and a wind of typhoon strength, called a northeaster, burst across the island and blew us out to sea. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, so they gave up and let it run before the gale. Okay, so here's what's happening. Paul's on this ship, a couple hundred other prisoners with him. And a few weeks into the journey, they're sailing close to the island of Crete, which is circled there on the map. They're sailing close to it, and they're trying to maintain balance of the ship and make sure they're moving in the right direction. And all of a sudden, this wind comes out of nowhere and just pushes them out to sea. And they're out of control. They're caught in the midst of a storm. Now, let me ask you, have you ever been caught in the midst of a storm? I'm sure you have, right? We all have. I remember in year 10 of my marriage, that's when my wife came to me and said, Dave, come on, we got to get help. It was the first time she ever came to me and said, Dave, I feel like we bury issues we shouldn't bury. I think we ignore things we shouldn't ignore. I think our communication is broken down. And it killed me because I felt like, man, she's saying I'm not a good husband and I'm trying as hard as I can. And it was embarrassing. You know, the first time you reach out for help is always embarrassing. It gets better after that. But it's just like, I don't know. And finally we did reach out. But man, I felt caught in the midst of a storm. A few years ago, 3 years ago, my daughter Alyssa was 14 years old. And for the life of me, I could not get her to go to school. She was just crippled with anxiety and with depression. And I didn't understand it. I've wrestled with depression, but not to the extent she had. And so my wife and I, we just were lost. And Randy made call after call. Eventually, we find a program down in Nashville. And so we waited a few months. And when she turned 15, we brought her down to Nashville and left her in a program for young ladies struggling with mental health issues. And we left her there. And it was so scary. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know, like for us, how to handle all this stuff. And she was there for about 5 months. But finally, she said, Dad, I've got to come home. I've been doing this for 5 months. I need to be with my family. So she came back, and we still said she needs help. So then we found a program out in the Lake Geneva area, and she's been there for the last year and a half, 2 years. And it's been one of those things where it's a parenting storm, and you just feel like, man, I'm a failure as a parent. How do we effectively love our kid and get her the help she needs? And I've been caught in storms. Right when I was 33 years old, that was the age I was when I started this church. I was so excited to start the church, but nobody told me the emotional journey it would bring me on. Right? Nobody told me how scary it would be to ask my friends and close family for money to help launch the church. Nobody told me how many highs I would have and how many lows I would have and what the emotional roller coaster, how that would affect me. Nobody told me in year 5 you're going to be hit with such a bout of depression because of the pressure of leading that you're just going to want to throw in the towel. There are going to be Sundays where you'll actually call in and say, put video on at all of our campuses. I just can't. Nobody told me the storms I would face. But you have your own storms. Some of you are finding yourself in a storm right now. Here we are, just a few months into 2018, and life isn't turning out the way you want it to. So what do you do when you're trying to maintain hope in a situation that feels hopeless? Well, Paul is in the midst of this storm, and there's actually some very practical lessons we can pull from his story. And I'm just going to tell you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can listen in and you can walk away today with some really, really, really practical stuff because this is going to help you. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I'm telling you, this is going to do good for you. However, if you are a follower of Jesus, this is imperative because we ought to be the most hope-filled people on the planet. So how do you maintain hope in a situation that feels hopeless? Number one, when you're in the midst of the storm, here's the first lesson we're going to take away. Stay put. Because in the midst of the storm, you're going to want to jump ship. But often the wisest thing to do is to stay put. It's to stay on the ship. Don't go anywhere. Right? So here's Paul. He's on this ship. It's halfway between Crete and Malta. So right out there in the middle of the sea, the storm is raging. And here's what we read. Then the sailors tried to abandon the ship. They lowered the lifeboat as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. Okay, so you've got these sailors and some soldiers with them who are trying to abandon the ship. They don't want anybody to know. What they're doing in the storm is they're putting down the lifeboats, but they're acting like it's anchors. They're pretending, which I think is really ironic because this is what we do in the storms. We don't want anybody to know what we're going through. We don't want anybody to know the crisis in the marriage, the crisis financially, the crisis in our parenting. We don't want anybody to know. So we just put on the smiling face and we pretend and we're putting down the lifeboats and we're like, I'm out of here, right? We're not going to tell everybody what's going on because as humans, we're convinced we ought to hide the mess so we can impress. Right? We can make everybody think everything is going good. It's like when you have guests show up to your home unexpectedly. Now, in 22 years of marriage, I have learned that if I'm going to invite someone over, I need to at least give my wife a little heads up. Right? And I learned that from just experiences where I did not do that. Right? And so I'll call her, and sometimes I've had to talk in code, hey, babe, you'll never guess who I ran into. Yep, our friends James and Becky. Yeah, I didn't know they were in town either. They didn't tell me. Yeah, yep, they're here. And it's on the other end. Dave, they're with you, aren't they? Yep, they're with me. Well, babe, here's the deal. We're going to be swinging by in just a few minutes, so I just wanted to call and say hi, and we're thinking about you. And no, Dave, do not bring them over right now. Let's go out to eat somewhere. No, you are not. The house is a mess. Okay, babe, yep. Well, we'll see you in about 8 minutes, 8 minutes, babe, I hope everything's going to be okay. It's like, no, and I hang up, and it's like, she is so excited to see you guys. Oh, she cannot wait. Well, what's happening behind the scenes? What's happening the other side of that phone call? It's all hands on deck, right? It doesn't matter the age of the kids. It doesn't matter the gender of the kids. It is a military that is unfolding. It is, you go put that over there, go throw that in the closet, that underwear, go put it in the oven, just get rid of it. Let us, come on, clean. And then it's 8 minutes later, ding, ding, and Randy opens the door and she's wearing this apron. I didn't even know she had an apron. She got an apron, and candles are burning, right? The smell of cookies being made. And it's like, what in the world? And they're like, oh, man, your wife's amazing. How did she pull this off? And you maybe been on the other side of that where you show up to someone's house, you're like, look, they got their act together. No, it's a full lie. Don't open any drawers. Don't open any door. There's a lie, right? But we have to impress. We have to impress. And that's what's happening here. And Paul senses this. So here's what Paul says. But Paul said to the commanding officers and the soldiers, you will all die unless the sailors stay aboard. He said, this isn't time to pretend. And this isn't time to abandon the ship. Stay put. Thankfully, they take his advice. Here's what we read. So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboat and let it drift away. When you're in the midst of the storm, you're going to panic. You're going to stress. It's human nature. But one of the best things you can do is you can just stay faithful. In the spring of last year, I called for the first time ever, and we're going to build this more regularly into the rhythm of our church, but for the first time ever, I called a family meeting, a family chat. And I shared very openly where our church was at. It was the scariest year of our church for me personally. We were going through transitions with facilities. There were a lot of unknowns. We were going through staffing transitions, but I called us all together and said, hey, here's what's ahead. And in a couple of weeks, we're going to have another family chat, but this one is going to be a fun one to have. All right, lots of exciting things happening around here. And I'm going to be able to talk about how we made it through. Why did we make it through? It's because the majority of our church linked arms and stayed together. We didn't abandon ship. Now, let me tell you, there were some that abandoned ship. There were a couple hundred that, whoa, where did they go? Where did they fall overboard? What happened to them? But the vast majority of our church linked arms and said, we're going to stay the course. And that's why we were able to make it through. And those who jumped ship, I don't even blame them. It's scary. It's concerning when the storm is happening. So if you're going through a storm, you need to stay hopeful. Don't react. Just stay the course. Stay the course. Do what you know you're supposed to do or feel like you're supposed to do. Don't be impulsive. Second lesson, if you're going to stay hopeful in the midst of the storm, is you need to take care of yourself. And this is something that I really did work on last year. For most of this journey that Paul has been on, right, the several weeks he's been on this journey, the weather has been incredibly unpredictable. And specifically, for the last couple of weeks, this weather has just been up and down. I mean, it's like living in Wisconsin, right? Just really, really concerning. And so here's what we read. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. Now, why did he urge them to eat? Because they hadn't been eating. They were so scared. You have been so worried that you haven't touched food for 2 weeks, he said. Please eat something now for your own good, for not a hair of your heads will perish. When you're in the midst of a storm, it's so easy to stop caring for yourself. It's so easy to stop caring for your physical health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, your financial health. But if you're going to make it through, and I'm going to make it through the storms, then we need to take care. We can't check out. We can't stop caring. We got to remain hopeful. And the way to remain hopeful is saying, I'm going to take care of myself in this season. Well, then there's a third lesson we learn in the midst of the storm, and that is this. That in the midst of the storm, we need to give thanks. If we're to remain hopeful, we got to learn how to be people who give thanks. See, anybody can honor God when things in life are going good. Right? It's easy when you're at the end of the day and everything was just perfect. Oh, Lord, I thank you. I went to work today, and the boss noticed everything I did, and I hear that I'm getting promoted, and my car didn't get doo-doo on it today, and it's been amazing. And I even said, if it's your will for me to get ice cream, open up a parking spot at Cold Stone, and sure enough, after 15 minutes of driving around the parking lot, you opened one right in front of the store. God, you are so good. Right? That's easy. But a lot of days feel like that book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. And nothing goes good. But if we're to stay hopeful, we have to learn to thank God in the midst of difficulty. Hey, God, it's been a terrible day. This hasn't been fun. Nobody called me back for a second interview. I'm still as jobless today as I was yesterday. There's no prospects on the horizon. But here's what I know. Ultimately, my hope is in you. I believe, love me. I believe you're more concerned about me than I'm concerned about myself. And so I'm just going to keep being faithful and doing what I know I can do. But I just want to thank you for being a loving and caring God. When we thank God, it gets our eyes off our current circumstances and on to Him. And so Paul encourages the passengers to eat. And then we read this. Then Paul took some bread and he gave thanks to God. Okay, the storm's out there brewing, but Paul gives thanks to God in the midst of the storm and before them all. And then he broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat, all 276 of us who were on board. In the midst of the storm, Paul's thanking God. He's focusing on the good. He's remembering where his hope is. There is something about thanking God during the storms of life that builds our faith and that keeps us encouraged. There's something about remembering God's faithfulness over the years that keeps us moving forward and gives us confidence about our future. Well, then there's a fourth lesson we learn from this story, and here it is. Hold on to whatever you have to hold on to in the midst of the storm. You're going to remain hopeful? Hold on to whatever you have to hold on to. So the storm is brewing, and the ship is getting close to this island of Malta. Everybody knows the ship is going to run aground pretty soon, and so they're starting to think about putting down anchors. Here's what happened. But they hit a shoal, okay, which is this shallow part on the ground. They hit a shoal, and they ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship struck fast while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. So all of a sudden, the crews and the passengers, they find themselves in this terrifying situation. The ship is falling apart. Everybody is terrified for their lives. But the soldiers are not just terrified for their lives, they're terrified that the prisoners are going to use this as a way of escaping. And then they're going to be held accountable. Now, that's a very legit fear. Because even today, we'll see tragedies happen in our world, and prisoners will take advantage of it. In fact, a few years ago, when Haiti was hit with a 7.0 earthquake back in 2010, there was one prison in Port-au-Prince that had 4,000 prisoners escape in one day during the earthquake. So it's understandable that the soldiers would be concerned about these prisoners escaping. Here's what we read. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held on to planks or debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to shore. Everyone who could swim swam, but everybody else held on to what they could during the storm, and they made it safely to shore. What do you have to hold on to in the midst of the storm? That's going to keep you hopeful in a situation that feels hopeless. For me, last couple of years, has been the words of encouragement from so many people. The emails, the cards that I received, and just as I was planning for this talk, I started going through some of those old emails, and a little Oprah moment going on. I would just get really choked up. Dave, I just want you to know that I appreciate you and everything GLC has done since it's begun. And then they give me an entire email filled with specific words of encouragement, and they end with this: we have your back. We believe in Great Lakes mission. We love our church. We're extremely thankful for it. Be encouraged. This is just a season. Someone else, your family and our church will always be in my prayers. You need to take a much-needed break. I want you to know God's got us. Someone else, I fully plan to continue to support Great Lakes for as long as God has me on this earth and hope to do so in a greater way every year. Thanks for being in this community. Thanks for helping me regain my passion for God. Just over and over, just fill my mind with this. Dave, I love you so much. I wish all of my kids were like you. Love, Mom. What do you have to hold on to when you're feeling hopeless? Maybe it's a group of friends. Maybe it's a group of friends that you're saying, man, I don't know how I'm going to make it in this season, but you know what? I'm holding on to this group of friends because I know they're praying for me and I know they got my back. Maybe for you, it's worship music. So you say, man, I don't want to lose sight of who God is in this season. I want to stay focused on the bigger picture. And so you just every day get in your car and you go to work and you put on songs of worship to just keep you focused. Maybe for you, it's healthy habits that you just have developed in your life, and you say, man, I'm not going to quit exercising. I'm not going to quit eating this way. I'm not going to quit doing this because I know in this season I need it to get me through. What are you holding on to when all around you seems to be crazy, when everything in your world seems to be hopeless? What are you just holding on to? Maybe for you, it's just going back to purpose and why you started whatever you started in the first place, or why you do what you do. It may feel like life is just a bunch of broken pieces right now, but God can get you to your destination. I love what the author of Hebrews writes. He says, "For God has said, I will never fail you. I will never abandon you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, so I will have no fear." You can trust God. That's why the big idea of this series is that one encounter with Jesus is enough to change you instantly, forever. One true encounter with Jesus may just give you the confidence you need that you can put your hope in him. And placing our hope in him doesn't mean a fake smile, and it doesn't mean everything's going to work out okay. It just means in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the tragedy, in the midst of the loss, I'm going to stay hopeful. I don't have to have a doom and gloom attitude. I can have hope, and here's why. I can have hope because I know that God is with me in the storm. This is what's so unique about following Jesus. This is what allows us to be light in the midst of darkness. We have hope, but it's rooted in something that no one else can with confidence say, and that is, I have rooted it in God Almighty. This is why following Jesus matters. You know, next week, we get to experience one of the great pictures of hope in water baptism. Right, this picture of hope that we can be changed, that the old can die away and be buried, and we can be resurrected to something new. My daughter, Alyssa, who's been out at this program for the last couple of years, she's going to be baptized next week. I invite you, if you've never been water baptized, to consider in our services, whether it's a Sunday morning or Wednesday evening, being water baptized. You just literally can put in your connection card, I'm interested in learning more about water baptism, and we will send you a link this week with information, and you can decide whether you'll sign up or not. But man, I'm excited for what this is going to do in our church, and I'm excited to celebrate. We got almost 50 people already signed up between our different campuses and service times. And if you're kind of questioning, I'm saying don't put it off. Celebrate what God has done in your life. What are we celebrating? It's this, that anyone who belongs to Christ has become a new person. The old life is gone and a new life has begun. Father, we thank you that you alone can make all things new. We have this hope. May we never, ever, ever lose sight of it. In Jesus' name, amen.